All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second edition of Meet Our Contributors. Extra special day today. We actually have two slots today for different time zones. Right now, it's 7:30 in the morning on the West Coast, bright and early for everyone. We have many awesome contributors on the line right now, and we'll get introductions started. George, why don't you go first? George is actually our YouTube streaming guru, and he's going to be on the ones and twos for us today. George, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm George Castro. I'm a community manager at Heptio. If you have any help getting started contributing, I'm working on the contributor guide. I'll mostly be monitoring Slack and streaming today and hope to answer all of your contributor questions.
And Dims.
Hi, my nickname is Dims. My name is rather long. I work for Huawei, and I mostly work on things like cloud providers and some testing and things like that.
Aaron.
Hi, my name is Aaron Krigenberger. I work for Samsung SDS. I am a member of the steering committee and co-founder of SIG Testing. And I do a lot of things related to contributor experience if you see my emails about turning stuff off on Kubernetes stuff. That's it.
And Jennifer.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Rondo. I'm a technical writer at Heptio, and I contribute to the upstream Kubernetes documentation. I'm a maintainer there. I've been working on release notes and upstream documentation since version 1.8. I'm now on my third release. Not sure what 1.11 is going to hold for me, but we're doing some pretty cool things with trying to get sort of doc standards in place and moving forward, making that contributor experience better for people too.
Woo! And Ilya.
Hi, I'm Ilya from ViewWorks, based in London. My GitHub and Twitter nickname is Air Developer. I've been involved with Kubernetes to varying extent throughout the time, and that kind of started in 2014, I think. So it's been a while. Yeah, I've worked on various projects, for example, kubeadm within SIG cluster lifecycle. Also, I know plenty about networking and various other aspects of Kubernetes. So, yeah.
Very cool. Thank you, everyone, again for joining today. My name is Paris. I work at Google. I'm a community manager, and I will be your host, answering and asking questions. For those that are joining us, if you'd like to ask a question, we will be collecting those in the Meet Our Contributor Slack channel on the Kate's instance and also on Twitter. If we can get any Twitter questions, and the hashtag there is K8SMOC, abbreviation for Kubernetes, and Meet Our Contributors, awesome abbreviations. All right. So let's do our first question, which was queued up yesterday. And this is sort of a user/contributor question. So that's why I think we should just go ahead with it. It kind of flows into both testing categories. So this individual is interested in hearing about your development workflows. They are fairly new to the project and having a hard time reconciling the contributor docs. They would like to run a single unit test as fast as possible, but building via Docker based on the build took a very long time. They are interested in what the fast feedback development approach looks like.
So I can answer as best as I can.
Yep.
So I guess posting links in Zoom chat doesn't really help, so maybe I can post this in Slack later or something. But essentially, I'm going to share my screen, I guess, maybe as a quicker way of doing this. So over here, I'm in the community repo, contributors devel. The file is called testing. And if I go down to run specific unit tests in a package, this gives me the command to run like just the test validate pod unit test. If I don't care about running just a specific unit test, I could use the what to say just test this specific package, so on and so forth. I believe if you run make test, it doesn't actually invoke the Docker build. I may be incorrect on that, but one of our testing conventions is that all unit tests should run and pass across all the 3 major operating systems, Linux, Mac, and Windows. So if you're running into unit tests that don't pass for whatever reason, we have a bug and we should fix that. We're working on finding ways to address that within CI, but you shouldn't technically have to run the build in Docker in order to do unit tests. So there's that. Next, the happy path isn't the greatest for your initial build because you do kind of have to build everything. But then incrementally, this make test thing should only build just the test files that you need to when you're running. And then going a step further, if you're interested in wandering into a slightly more complicated build system, instead of using make, there is the possibility of using Bazel, which is significantly more intelligent about exactly what needs to be built when. But that's something I personally am not familiar with and would like to see a little bit more polish applied before I would recommend that to new contributors. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, Aaron, I can add a little bit more color. So even if things are running using, so let's start from the beginning. So the reason why Go test directly doesn't work is because we generate some files. And these files, for example, if you just do a make for the kubectl or kube command or anything like that. So the first time it runs, the files are generated and laid down on disk. So the second time when you run, those files are not regenerated unless you wipe them out. So suppose things are very slow, then what you can do is you can run make test with what that Aaron showed first. Just prime the pump basically to make sure that all the files are generated on disk, and then you can switch over to go test -v, and that works most of the time as well.
All right. Thanks to both for that. Looks like they have another testing type of question. They're very interested in hearing how other developers are performing manual integration test. Example, they've made the change, built and tested the changes, and now want to deploy in an environment they can run their custom binaries in. Interested in hearing what your specific environments look like and any tooling that you may use and any gotchas, tips, etc. that you would have for this process.
So again, I'll start because I suspect Dims might have a better answer, so I want to give the crappier one first. This is not something I've had to do in a while, but when I was doing development, I was in a place where I had access to a cloud provider and I needed to make sure first and foremost that my changes worked within that cloud provider. So testing locally on my machine was not sufficient for me. So in my case, I work for Samsung. We have a tool called Kraken, and I use that to stand up a cluster with a custom build. My impression is that you can do the same thing with the cluster scripts in Kubernetes. So if you kube-up or whatever, it'll use whatever happens to be present, either a downloaded binary or something that's been built. If I put on my SIG testing hat, I can say that, another thing I'll share my screen about real quickly. So there's a page in the community repo called E2E tests. All right, so wow, that window doesn't need to be there. So contributors develop E2E tests, end-to-end testing in Kubernetes. We're going to go down a little bit here, and this thing here talks about how you can go run this E2E script with a variety of flags such as build, up, test, whatever. So basically, this would create a brand new cluster, and it wouldn't do anything else. And now I've got a kubectl that's pointed at that cluster, and I can do things to that cluster if I so desire. And then I could repeatedly run tests with specific arguments to test just specific things. And then, over in another window or whatever, I can go actually poke at the cluster manually. It's been a while since I've used this route of doing things, but I believe you can also use like a push or an update thing to, like, with the node still up, push out a new build. But I may be making stuff up, or I may be telling you something that's a year or two old at this point. And then just one last plug to make is this E2E Go thing is actually a shim around a program called kubetest. So you can rest assured that if you're using that E2E Go thing, you're using pretty much the exact same thing that we use to run E2E tests in Kubernetes CI. And it's got, very, very similar flags of up to stand up a cluster, test to execute the cluster. And then it's got a couple of things to say, build a fresh copy of Kubernetes and then deploy a cluster with that. Or maybe, once I've built it, I can stage it to a bucket so that other things can download it from that bucket later, which staging to a bucket and then downloading it is usually the approach I've seen a lot of cluster deployment tools take. That's all I've got.
Tim, do you want to weigh in on that one?
Yeah. So let me share my screen. So can everyone see this?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the local up cluster shell script. All you need to do is do a git clone of the Kubernetes repository, and then just run hack local up cluster.sh. That's it. And what this does is it builds everything that it needs, and it actually starts the various processes that are associated with Kubernetes. It also prompts you to download etcd if you don't already have it, and so on. So essentially, the why this is very important is what are the other alternatives? The other alternatives are to actually use KubeADM to stand up a cluster, or use any of the other tools that Aaron was talking about. But this one, you can just start a Ubuntu VM, git clone Kubernetes repository, and run hack local up cluster.sh, and that's it. You're done. And you can run it as a daemon. There are many flags within this script, so you can go look at how things are connected. So essentially, what we use this for is if you need a single VM deployment that is easy to start, easy to tweak, and quickly you can make changes and deploy. This is what we typically use. At least I typically use, and I highly recommend taking a look at this one. So so now that we have a local up cluster, then how can we run the end-to-end test, for example, that Aaron was talking about? So the main thing I wanted to show here was over the last couple of weeks, we added support for a new set of jobs in SIG testing that use this local end-to-end test. So essentially, if you go to the K8s test grid app spot, you can see all the tests that we have, and one of them is the local end-to-end test. And this one, actually, if I click on one of them, you can see that there are 2 failures, and this is because we are still bootstrapping the local up cluster. It's not fully compliant. I'm trying to run the conformance test here, and 2 of them are failing. And we have PRs in progress for both of them. So when that's done, and when 110 ships, we'll essentially have a test bed, local test bed. So how does this actually work? This works by local. I wanted to show you that all it does is it uses local up cluster.sh. See, I'll try to bump up the font so you can see a little bit better. So all it does is local up cluster, and walking through what it does, you can take a look at. It builds all the generated files that I was talking to you about before, and then it builds all the binaries that are required, right? And then it pulls out a few more apt stuff from Ubuntu, and then it essentially starts API server. And you can see the logs are placed in a temporary directory, and then it tells you how to use kube config and how to set up your kubelet configurations. And then essentially I'm running this as a daemon. So there is a flag called daemon equals true or false. And essentially, if you don't want to run it as a daemon, run it in a separate terminal, and then you can use kubectl command from another terminal. So what does it do? So once it starts the local end-to-end tests, all it does is it runs the end-to-end tests. If I scroll down, you can see this is the typical output that you see from the end-to-end test. And if you want to see the failure, so that's the failure. And you can see that you can see the logs that are associated with that test just before the failure, this thing. Now, how did I actually put this together, right? So I can show you what I did, what this internally does, right? This CI job is all it does is it runs a specific image that was pre-built by our SIG testing folks called the kubekins latest master. And you can simulate what we do in that CI job just by doing a Docker run and start a container and run the test. So if you look at so that's the Docker command for that. I have a gist. If you go to gist.github.com and do kubetest.sh, you can see the gist. So and inside the shell script run test.sh, all I do is like start Docker and then do a git clone, and this is exactly what Aaron was showing you earlier, which is a kubetest command. And the most important thing here is the deployment and the provider. If you set it to local, then it uses the local up cluster to start using -up. Down means bring it down when you're done, and test means you run the specified test. And here, using this, we are essentially saying run all the tests in a single thread. Don't run it in parallel. And we are running the conformance test here. And instead of conformance, you can type in the exact specific test that you want to run in the end-to-end test. So that's all it does. So you run the Docker container starts up, and then you do a git clone, and then you do a kube test. Kube test starts a local up cluster, and then runs the test and reports the values. So it's pretty simple to get started and kick the tires. I hope that helps. The one other thing that people ask me is like, how do I figure out what tests are there and how do I run those tests? For example, there were audit tests that were failing. How do I figure out which tests, where the tests are, right? The tests are in our Kubernetes repository. If you go to test, end-to-end test, and most of the tests are below here. And let's just pick something in storage, for example, right? If you go here, let me search for conformance it. Right, conformance it is the method that we use to annotate, to essentially make the call to set up things. So, for example, this one is a conformance test, and if you copy this string and stick it in where I had conformance, then it essentially runs this one specific test. That's another tip that is usually helpful because it takes a long time to run all the tests. Sorry, Ilya, you were saying something? Oh, okay. So that's what I wanted to show. Maybe another thing that I wanted to show was, okay, let's say this one, right? Now, how do I easily search for things in a Kubernetes repository? So this is one utility. I have it on my personal, I run it on my personal hardware. So you can use it too. So for example, so it's easy to search for anything you want to across all the Kubernetes repository. So this is very useful for me when somebody puts up a random stack trace or a message that's coming out from Kubernetes. I have no idea where it is, then I just plug it in here and then go looking for stuff. So that's what I wanted to show you. It's incredibly useful for debugging as well.
Tim, this was extra helpful. You definitely went out of your way to answer that question. So thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Paris.
All right. We actually have 2 testing questions in the queue as well, but I'm going to skip to some other testing to give you both a break. We'll go to somewhat of a general-ish question. Danny in the chat wants to know if there's any SIGs looking for new contributors or any new participants. So this is a good time if you are in a SIG or working group that needs new folks to help out to talk about that. But then also in a more general sense, how do new contributors find out if other SIGs are looking for folks? Anybody want to take that one? Like Jennifer, I know maybe Docs.
Docs is always looking for contributors. We welcome new people. It's the start of our weekly meeting, and when no new people show up, we're sad. It's also true that we get a fair amount of rotating in and out of SIG Docs. There's a core group of maintainers that's pretty stable, and then folks who drop by when they can. And so we appreciate involvement and contribution whenever and however you can manage to fit it in. And there's all kinds of work available to do on the docs too. There's definitely technical stuff that always needs to be written and reviewed. And there's often, usability stuff. If you're new to Kubernetes, it's kind of a classic point. You've got fresh eyes on things that don't work. There's actually been a great conversation going on in the Slack channel about installing kubectl and kubeadm and ways in which the docs don't quite meet people's expectations. And I've copy-pasted the whole thing out, and as soon as somebody gets a PR in, I will go take a look and see whether navigation or content reorg can help. So it's a really nice, what's going on in the channel right now is a really nice reflection of the ways that you can contribute to docs, whether you want to join the SIG or, sort of do a drive-by. It's really, really excellent.
Awesome. Ilya, do you know of any groups or how they can look?
Yeah, certainly SIG Cluster Lifecycle is always looking for new contributors as well.
And so, how can they connect with that group and look?
So a good place to start would be the SIG Cluster Lifecycle Slack channel or the weekly meeting. We have 2 main weekly meetings. One on Tuesday, which is morning, I think it's 10 o'clock Pacific time, and 5 o'clock Greenwich time. And there's another meeting that is happening actually right after this meeting, which is a kubeadm office hours, which is probably a good one for new contributors to join. All these meetings can be found in the community repo, in the SIG Cluster Lifecycle page and community repo.
Good plug. I also know that Service Catalog is looking for new participants, and I actually just found that out today on Twitter. So connect with the Service Catalog folks on Slack or their mailing list, or as Ilya just mentioned, their information is also within the community repo under SIG list, as are all 35 plus special working groups or special interest groups and working groups. Also, contributor experience is also looking for help with creating the best possible experience for contributors. We actually have a meeting today in an hour and a half-ish. If you'd like to join, same deal. Our information is on the SIG list within the community repo. Anyone else have any other plugs for groups that may be looking for new contributors?
I can just talk in general a little bit. So it depends on your interest, right? The people who are, there is a lot of things you can self-discover. The main thing that you look is in the community repository and in the Kubernetes repository. You can go hunt for information there. And the other thing that I would say is go look at the Slack channels and hang out, and you just can be a fly on the wall. You don't even have to say stuff, just till you get to know the people and things like that. So, and I usually go to SIG meetings of different kinds, and for like 2-3 weeks, I don't even say anything, maybe more. But then you kind of like absorb how they work and what they do, and see where you're comfortable and where you think you can help. It doesn't have to be a big deal, even if there are small bugs that you can triage and small PRs that you can review. That's the best way to start. And some of us didn't really know Go when we started looking into Kubernetes. So we all learn on the fly. So start somewhere and keep going. That's what I would say.
Awesome feedback, Aaron.
I just got to put in a plug for SIG testing, I guess. But I think everything Dim said is great. Like, I personally, sometimes I feel it's almost like a bit of an anti-pattern that folks feel they have to first join a SIG and then figure out what to do. Although I understand that it's really useful to know that there are humans that you can contact. And so I do think that lurking in Slack channels to get a feel for the vibe of the SIG would help. So my plug for SIG testing is we have added, I believe, the most custom Slack emojis. So we are super heavy Slack participants. It's a great place to hang out. And I think like little tiny contributions that we would really appreciate. We're not doing a super awesome job at applying the help wanted label to things that are pertinent and relevant, but we're getting there. And I believe we are looking to add for new contributors label back in. This is a discussion that's ongoing with contributor experience. But like one of the tiny things, for example, is we have a lot of end-to-end tests that fail with expected error timed out waiting for a condition not to have occurred. I'm like, what condition? What was the timeout? Where did this happen? Why did this happen? And like stuff as simple as adding a slightly different log message would help tremendously with this anti-pattern. It's a small fix. There are lots of them to make. There's a help wanted issue for it in the Kubernetes repo, and we definitely welcome the help.
Awesome. And George, I think you got on video rather. Did you want to plug something?
Yeah, I just want to say it's totally fine to not pick a SIG and then just shop around. Just attend a few SIGs. Sorry, I got construction everywhere. Go to a few SIGs, say, hey, even if all you do is take URLs from what people are talking about and paste them in chat, kind of see if it's for you, and then just walk the earth and then figure out what you want to do. That's fine too.
Yeah. And then also shout out to George, Gwynn, Tim Pepper, and others who are actually working on a contributor guide as well, which you can find in the community repo under contributors. There is extensive work going on with that and making it discoverable, and also a future developers guide as well that's more comprehensive. So if anybody on the line wants to start contributing, honestly, I think that's a great place to start. You poke holes at our process and also figure out what developers need as far as documentation is concerned. And again, that work is coming out of contributor experience. So if you're looking to dig in there, join us. next question. And then what we're going to do is something special with Jennifer. Jennifer's actually going to take us through a doc review. Jennifer, are you still game for that? All right, cool. One more question, and then we'll get into that. So Ilya, do contributors generally build with Docker or without? Oh, I can't hear you. Or can anybody hear Ilya?
Yeah, so
Okay. All right.
yeah, I should be able to hear now. What I'm saying, well, most of the developers who use a Mac laptop or a Windows laptop, perhaps, will probably end up using Docker, right? So I think if you're developing on Linux, you may get away without it, but sometimes it's just easier to not have to configure your machine to have all the dependencies.
Anybody else want to weigh in on that question? All right.
Yeah, like I was alluding to earlier, if you're just doing like unit tests or integration tests, you can totally get away with developing and building locally. It's if you need to, basically anything that involves kubelet and actually testing it live requires Linux, right? There's not a kubelet that natively supports orchestrating containers on Mac. We're getting really close to having a kubelet that can do that on Windows, which will be amazing. Yeah, I think ultimately, if you get to the land of having to do fully fledged integration testing with the whole cluster, you're going to have either Linux as your development environment or a virtual machine someplace where you can run all the things.
All the things. All right. So now this is the second segment of Meet Our Contributors, where what we're trying to do is either a live peer code review or a live peer docs review. And since we have Jennifer on the line today, she's actually going to take us through a docs review. Jennifer, we do have more questions, so do not feel like you need to to squeeze everything or even elongate everything into 30 minutes. So when you're done, and we can ask these folks some more questions. Cool.
I think 30 minutes worth of doc reviews would not be sufficiently interesting to anybody. Don't worry, I'm not going to inflict this on you. What I do have is, I think, like 3 different pull requests queued. 2 are already merged and 1 is awaiting review, just to show you the range of things that we deal with. Because people come to docs with all kinds of assumptions about how to contribute, what's valuable, and we get all kinds of things, but if you don't know, you don't know. So let me fiddle just for a minute with sharing screen, because I don't always get this set up right. Okay. Have I got this so you can see a review?
Yeah.
Okay. So I did check in with the folks who submitted these pull requests too. Not that they're not a matter of public record, but they know that we're talking about this. So this is a new doc, or contributions to an existing doc, but fairly substantial new content for the upcoming release. So it's additional technical information. One of the things that the SIG docs maintainers do not have is expertise in all of the parts of Kubernetes. We depend on outside technical reviewers to verify the technical accuracy of a lot of PRs. For minor things or for things where we happen to have expertise because we're involved in other SIGs or working on related projects, we will do tech review ourselves. But our standard process is, where we've got substantial content additions, is to make sure we have both a tech review, LGTM, and a doc review, LGTM. And in this case, what you see is all technical changes. There's actually some there's a technical conversation going on between 2 contributors to this feature, actually. that's the folks who added this. There's side conversations that I happen to know about because I'm running the docs for the 1.10 release. And so, there's some interesting bits here, right? I mean, the comment I really like here is inconsistency between implementation and design document, right? It happens, and that's one of the reasons we need tech review, so that people who know where the different moving parts are actually happening can check up on each other. This review has, so Joe Heck is one of the SIGDocs maintainers, and he's simply given it a clean bill of health from a docs perspective. We sometimes get pickier. And so with regard to docs LGTMs, and so let's see, this one is still open. There's a little bit of sort of wording stuff going on here in tech review, but what I need to go in and do now is to provide some feedback around conformance to the docs style guide. And we are experimenting with how much we ask for compliance with the style guide. Historically, we haven't been particularly insistent because we simply have had too large a volume of pull requests, and we need to get the content in. And we cannot worry about whether people use Latinisms. That's this via right here, via annotations. Makes the technical writer in me twitch, but if people are going to understand what it means, we're not going to worry about it too much. Depends on where we are in the cycle and what the PR backlog looks like, honestly. How much feedback you're going to get about compliance with the style guide. And we are in the process of reviewing how much of the style guide makes sense to adhere to going forward. The style guide exists for a couple of different reasons. One is to make sure that the English is as accessible to a range of native languages as possible. And the other is to provide the kind of, I guess, authoritative reassurance that consistency can provide, so that things get named the same way in every case. We don't have that in all kinds of ways across the doc set. One of the most obvious, perhaps, which I don't think is breaking user experience, but makes the copy editor in me twitch, is capitalizing the names of Kubernetes objects. Right? Some people do, some people don't. Some reviewers catch it, some don't. And whether it matters is really kind of a matter of time, right? What do we need to get into the docs as quickly as possible? So as I said, this particular pull request, I've decided I'm going to see what happens if I get a little pickier with regard to compliance to the style guide, but I'm also going to be very careful about how I make those comments, not being hard-assed or insistent about it. Some of this is education, right? Some of it is getting people used to noticing things about the way they write. And some of it is figuring out that we just don't worry about certain kinds of things that other style guides might worry about. We try to keep it lightweight in the first place. The Kubernetes docs style guide is the smallest style guide I know of for any docs project. And that's to make compliance easier. But if it's not easy enough, we'll make it lighter, right? On the other hand, if we need to insist on compliance because there seem to be problems, we will try to adhere to those guidelines. So that's actually a place where new contributors to docs can provide feedback also. Most of the time, people don't look at the style guide. We're trying to figure out how to get people to pay attention too. But it is a thing that the maintainers try to pay attention to, try to figure out the best way to sort of provide both guidance and appropriate levels of compliance. In this, I think it's not all that our reviews aren't that different from code review, but there's obviously some important differences as well. And then I'll show you one more thing. Like I said, Paris, I was not going to take a whole lot of time here. We've got, I had a few more, but here's Here is a pull request on a completely different order. This one is huge. So these first bits are just little bits, and then we've got a whole, I think this is a new topic. So dealing with high availability. And I'm showing you just the initial PR and one set of comments. But in fact, there's extensive review. We've got 3 technical reviewers on this topic already. And when I go in to provide doc review, it's going to be significantly lighter weight than it would be on a smaller PR. This one's been hanging in there for a while. We need to get the content into the docs. If I decide, or one of the other maintainers decides that, well, really it could use some better conformance to the style guide for usability purposes, we'll go in and make those pull requests ourselves. We don't have to insist that absolutely every contributor to the technical side of the documentation sort of be as nitpicky as we might be. But again, it's a matter of available resources, and we're always having to sort of slice and dice here. At a certain level, anybody can contribute to the docs, anybody can write, but we're also trying to get to that point where we provide sort of guidelines toward making it more usable. And again, the conversation about sort of which content you highlight and how navigation and presentation might help that, that's in the Meet Our Contributors Slack right now. That's a good example of where sort of technical information and content organization or information architecture and ways of wording things can come together so that people help make the most usable possible docs. I'll stop there if anybody's got questions about how we review. This is also very much a work in progress, sort of developing doc review standards. One of the biggest things we're trying to do right now is get through the PR queue faster. This has been, I mean, it's a huge problem for everybody, right? But we have been kind of embarrassed at how they've backed up. And we've just, as of last week, instituted a rotation where the core maintainers are signing up for a week of being in charge of the PR queue and making sure that we get at least a first response within, well, right now we say a week, but the idea is with assigning sort of queue tenders. The idea is to get a first response into new PRs within 24 hours. Even if it's nothing more than making sure that it's assigned and that somebody is going to monitor the thing. We get a lot of lightweight ones that we can pretty much get through immediately. We get spell checks and we get grammar corrections, and those things we can, as long as we commit to reviewing in timely fashion, we can get those ones through the queue pretty quickly. But inevitably, things like this high availability one come up where there's a lot of back and forth with review. And one of the things we have to do is just make sure that that keeps moving forward. We are trying to make a better commitment to that.
Awesome. Jennifer, question for you.
Yes.
If there was one thing you could tell contributors about docs, say like a tip that or trend that you see that's going awry, what would that be? So I'm sure you might even hit spelling actually, or something to do with spelling. What's one thing that you would want to tell contributors about docs?
Try it.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot to be learned if you're interested about what makes good docs. No, I do have something more specific than that.
Okay.
One of the things that I notice about technical contributors to the docs is a default assumption that this is how I like to experience documentation. If you can get outside your own head, even for 5 minutes, and think about how somebody else who maybe doesn't have your background or your experience might need the information that you're trying to provide, just especially if you're a technical contributor, you're providing information you probably know all too well. This is kind of like everything everybody else has said about about first-time contributors, right? You have that new perspective if you're a first-time contributor. You don't know all the things, and so you ask the questions that people have forgotten need to be answered. If you're one of those experienced people providing us with content, or even if you're not, try thinking about what it might look like from the perspective of somebody else. Just try stepping outside your own shoes for a minute, 5 minutes. It's not easy to do. And sometimes you don't have much information. One of the things that I find most challenging about working on the Kubernetes documentation is figuring out who my audience is. If I'm going to go in and either reorganize content or suggest significant changes to a topic because I think it's badly organized, I want to understand who it is reading this content might need a different organization, right? And I don't always have good information about that. Our audience is broad. In the case of this particular meeting, our audience is, new contributors. But Kubernetes users come in so many different sort of flavors. And people exploring the docs come in so many different flavors that getting a handle on that is a real challenge. It's part of what drove the user journeys project that we launched earlier this year, the new portal pages for the documentation site, where we're trying to address what people coming from different sorts of backgrounds or people who have different roles might need first when they're learning about Kubernetes. But that's an ongoing process that we refine. And anytime anybody contributing to docs can help us understand that better, that's just golden.
Thank you, Jennifer, for that. That was awesome. And if anybody listening wants to do a live peer code review or a docs review for any of our next sessions, please go ahead and submit one. We would love to review it. That was more of the process that Jennifer takes. But like I said, if anybody has something that they want reviewed on the spot by a peer, this is a great place for it. All right, so we have some other questions, and then we'll wrap for this session. One of the questions that I received privately on Slack is for all the contributors, and they want to know what is a business case that they can give to their boss to start upstream contributions to Kubernetes on work time, especially if it sounds like they're already using Kubernetes right now.
Yeah. Okay. This is near and dear to my heart. The first thing you need to do is find something that is broken that you need fixed for your own use case. And then that'll get you the initial time for the first step. And you do this a few times, then your boss will say, okay, you're doing some important work that is reflected. Then that is how you get into the side of things. Whatever work you do at work, you need justification as well, right? So try to fix problems that you have, that your coworkers have in your deployment or in your use case. It could be something very simple, but that's how you get started, in my opinion.
Billy, did you have something to add to that?
I can't give. I think Dame's answer was better for the more concrete, direct, tactile thing. I say this as somebody who's thought leadering at the Open Source Leadership Summit right now, where that question is coming up over and over in sort of the grander sense, like why should a company even commit to open source, period? Or why should they contribute back upstream instead of just using it? And I think one of the answers that comes up over and over is that open source can be one of the best funnels to your company, both in terms of gaining reputation that your company actually knows what it's doing with the particular projects it's contributing to. Oftentimes, it can also make the community around that open source project one of the biggest fan bases for your company, depending on how actively involved you are in it. So I can say, like, at the top of my mind are the companies that are allowing people to contribute most effectively to Kubernetes. I think it's also encouraging to see such a wide array of companies contributing to Kubernetes, so as to ensure that there's no one particular vendor who locks it up and steers it in just one direction. And another sort of slightly good thing is I think experience with open source projects really opens your eyes to what it takes to get up and running relatively quickly. And you can then take that experience back to your own company and help with making introductions to companies' projects a lot faster. I've heard stories of people who, like, once they hire an open source maintainer who's used to, you know, a README and really simple steps to build, test, and contribute to a project, and then they look at the company's internal processes and head explodes, and they help with that. And then the company can sort of see, like, oh, look, we're capable of onboarding new people and, like, getting to production significantly faster because we've adopted some of the best practices from open source. So, you know, that's the longer strategic upsell, but I think it's more tactical, like, you're going to get a lot more experience, and you'll start to find people who will help you out and build a great network for getting questions answered more quickly.
And then George.
I like to tell people, consider everyone here as part of your IT organization. Like, you know, just like you would if internally you were writing something like Kubernetes internally, except you're saving a ton of money and, you know, avoiding a ton of mistakes. So I kind of approach it that way, right? Like, you know, we're going to solve problems, and somebody else is going to solve the problem, and we're going to get a benefit from that, even though this company might be in a totally different field. It might be a bank and we're a grocery store kind of thing. So I think there's a case that you can make towards your manager. It's like, hey, a bunch of us together is way smarter than, you know, as smart as the people who work here are, working together as an industry across horizontally, you know, different fields and things like that, ultimately shows, I mean, because that's how Kubernetes came to exist in the first place. So I think that kind of shows that there's value there, and I think the savvy companies recognize that. And, you know, that ties into the people want to work at those kind of companies that get it, right? Because there's nothing more frustrating than working in a company where you can't grab someone else who's fixed the same problem, right? If I'm in a silo fixing a problem that Aaron fixed, I'm not happy, you know? Whereas, as you know, so like commodity plumbing like this, there's a good benefit of my employers having good relationships, so that if Aaron fixes something, we all benefit, and then we can get on to actually fixing real problems for our companies instead of getting stuck in infrastructure gunk. I guess that's how I kind of pitch it to people.
Good pitches, y'all. Very good. Last question, and this came through private Slack message, and it's most likely for Ilya. Where do European contributors hang out? Are there meetup groups or other things or events or Slack channels or anything like that you can share with European contributors? Curious.
Good point. So we kind of don't have a dedicated Slack channel. Maybe we should have one, actually. Because what I actually find quite hard is to sort of find somebody in time zone who you know, be able to just sort of point me in some direction when I need some help. And I often end up having to wait until the next day or late in the evening to just get some basic questions answered, or I just ask the few friends of mine who I know are in this time zone. So, but that usually means, yeah, I'm basically going to one or two people with my questions. So I think it probably could be a good idea to create a Slack channel, but we do have meetups, obviously, in most of the major cities. Like London Kubernetes meetup is pretty big, but to be honest with you, I actually
don't know too many contributors who go to the meetup. Meetup in London is mostly for users, right? Most of the attendees are users. Some are contributors, but maybe they can work on I mean, the contributors who come to the meetup that I know are not working on Kubernetes project directly. So yeah, I don't really know about other cities, but it sounds like we should have some kind of Slack channel. But then on the other hand, perhaps there should be some kind of regional Slack channels for each of the major regions, which have significant time zone differences with other ones, right? And one more thing I wanted to add: we do have the European office hours every month, which are mostly for users, but contributors are more than welcome to come and hang out and also help out with questions.
Very cool. And the Slack idea is a good one. George and I are both Slack admins, and we can make that happen today.
Yeah.
We have always been totally okay with regional Slack channels. It's just not too many requests. We do have like a China users group and things like that on Slack. But if anybody's listening and ever needs Slack support, Slack admins is the channel to go to pitch any ideas or things along those lines. And Ilya, I'll get in touch with you today and we'll create something. Cool.
Yeah, sounds like
Don't forget to pitch KubeCon EU.
Yeah, I know. KubeCon EU as well.
Oh, definitely, yes.
where you can go to our live office hours in the European time zone. Yes.
Come to Copenhagen.
Oh yeah, you know what? And we didn't even pitch there is a contributor summit, by the way, in Copenhagen for those who are interested a day before the festivities start, which is May 1st. This is free to all contributors, and no, you do not have to have a ticket to KubeCon to get in. So that's even better for those who cannot attend KubeCon. All right, well, that wraps this edition of Meet Our Contributors. Thank you so much to everyone that joined today. Lots of testing questions, lots of introductory questions. Jennifer, thanks so much again for the doc review. I will see everybody on this channel. Well, not you folks, but I will see any watchers again in a few hours here for our next session with new contributors. So thanks so much. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, Pat.
Happy Wednesday.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Good to see everyone. Bye-bye.